Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update from Rouse IAS. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we'll be taking up the daily edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 26 November 2020. Dear aspirants, we have two important announcements. Now the first important announcement is that the Indian Polity Constitution Governance 2020 Mains Compass has been uploaded on the eLearn platform. The PDF of which is also available for free on the platform. Now by clicking on this link you can get access to this PDF. Now this PDF contains all the key topics that are important from the point of view of the mains of 2020. So please log on to the eLearn platform and make an account to gain access to this document. Now the second important announcement is that the mains weekly question assignment has been uploaded on the eLearn platform and the link for which has been shared in the description box below. All those who submit their answers before Saturday will get their answers evaluated by our Rouse evaluation expert. Now this article appears on the page number 1 of the Hindu newspaper and it has been titled as Heavy Rain as Cyclone Nivar Approaches Coast. Now cyclone are geophysical phenomenon that falls under the mandate of India Geography and World Geography under the prelims examination syllabus, and from the point of view of the mains examination it falls under the mandate of General Studies paper 1 subsection Geography that talks about geophysical phenomena such as cyclone. Further, this is also important from the point of view of GS paper 3 that talks about disaster and disaster management. Now, Nivar cyclone was said to have made landfall in the early hours of 26 November, that is today, near Puducherry. This has caused massive heavy rainfall near the Puducherry Union Territory and its neighborhood Tamil Nadu. Now it is the Bay of Bengal region where this cyclone formed and it took a curved path towards the direction of Puducherry and Chennai. So now let us try to understand how are these cyclones formed and what are the critical factors that are important for providing conducive environment for formation of such cyclones. Now cyclone in simple terms refer to rapid inward air circulation around low pressure areas. Now there are low pressure depressions that are formed in the Bay of Bengal. When these low pressure depressions get strengthened, they take the form of a cyclone. Now these cyclones usually bring storm and bad weather and rainfall. Now these cyclones are generally of two types. One is the tropical cyclone, another is the extratropical cyclone, which is also known as the temperate or frontal cyclone. However, with context of India, we will only be discussing tropical cyclones. Now in front of you are the 6 most crucial factors that are responsible for the formation of tropical cyclones. Now the first and the most important factor is the sufficient warm temperature at the sea surface. Now this temperature should be minimum 27 degrees Celsius because it is because of this low pressure region gets formed in the Bay of Bengal that later takes form of a cyclone. Next important factor is that pre-existing low-level focus or disturbance. Again, this refers to a pre-existing low-level pressure systems that exist in the Bay of Bengal that later take the form of a cyclone. Now, the third important factor is Coriolis force. Now, Coriolis force refers to the deflection that is caused due to the movement of the earth. Now, this is anti-clockwise in the northern hemisphere, because of which when winds flow from high pressure areas towards the low pressure areas where the depressions are formed, they actually get deflected towards the anti-clockwise direction, giving rise to swirl-like formations which later results in cyclonic formation. Further, the next important point is high humidity in the lower to middle level of the troposphere. Now it is the continuous supply of these warm moistures from the sea that acts as a fuel for this cyclone to continue its existence. Now as soon as the landfall occurs, that is when these cyclones hit the land region, they dissipate within 5 to 6 hours as their source of fuel, that is the moisture, is cut off. And this is what has happened in the case of Nivar cyclone. Now next important point is upper air divergence. Now cyclone are low pressure formations that have an high pressure opening at the top. Now as the winds from high pressure area due to the pressure gradient force reach the low pressure areas of the sea, they rise and give rise to what is known as cumulonimbus clouds. These cumulonimbus clouds are result of the upper air divergence, which is the high pressure area that exists directly above the low pressure area in the tropopause region of the atmosphere. Now the last and important factor is the absence of low vertical wind shear. Now wind shear refers to the difference in the horizontal speed of the wind that is flowing from high pressure areas to low pressure areas. Now if the speed of the wind vary, then it is very difficult for the eye of the cyclone to form, since this tunnel-like formation will not be possible. Hence these are the 6 factors that are responsible for the formation of the cyclone. Now let us try to study the various stages of this cyclone formation. Now at the initial stage, the cyclonic storm depends upon the transfer of water vapor and heat from the warm ocean to the overlying air. Now this is the depression that is formed. Now the initial stage of development of the cyclone involves rise of convection air that includes the water vapor from this area of the warm ocean surface. This rises and condenses to give rise to cumulonimbus clouds at the tropopause. Now these vertical cumulonimbus clouds are result of convection and condensation. Next we move on to the mature stage. Now at this stage, the storm intensifies as the air rises with vigor. Now when this condensation takes place, there is a release of latent heat. Now this latent heat release further strengthens the low pressure at the bottom, giving rise to a self-sustaining system. Now moving on to the last stage, which is the modification or the decay stage. At this stage, the cyclone begins to weaken as it hits the landfall. That is the time when the cyclone moves from sea towards the land. Its source of fuel, that is the sea water or the warm surface water vapor, is no more available, as a result of which within the time frame of 5 to 6 hours the cyclone dissipates, and this is what is expected of the Nisar cyclone as well. Now this is how a vertical section of a tropical cyclone looks like. Now this represents the low pressure area and the eye of the cyclone. These reflects the cumulonimbus clouds that are formed. Here is the tropopause where the high pressure region exists, and here is the divergence of the wind at the top of the troposphere. So this is how a vertical section of the tropical cyclone Nisar looks like. Now moving on to the next article. Now this next article appears on the page number 7 of the Hindu newspaper, and it has been titled as "We Don't Need No EduTech Control." Now this article talks about the recent rise of the education tech companies during the 8 months of the pandemic. Now these companies have been trying to address the vacuum that has been created because of the pandemic. The parents of the children have been worried about the education loss, and hence this is an important issue from the point of view of GS paper 2 that talks about social justice in terms of education and various aspects of human resources. Further, it is also important from the point of view of GS paper 3 that talks about technology and its application in everyday life. Now herein we are seeing a merger of these two topics, wherein we see that education system is being facilitated through technology, and hence this topic can be asked in both these two papers. Now in this article, the author has been raising various questions with respect to this educational technology. He has been raising questions such as, do people really know what their children should be studying at the young age, and is the computer science education really appropriate for such young children? Now this next article appears on the page number 7 of the Hindu newspaper, and it has been titled as "We Don't Need No EduTech Control." Now this article talks about the recent rise of the education tech companies during the 8 months of the pandemic. Now these companies have been trying to address the vacuum that has been created because of the pandemic. The parents of the children have been worried about the education loss, and hence this is an important issue from the point of view of GS paper 2 that talks about social justice in terms of education and various aspects of human resources. Further, it is also important from the point of view of GS paper 3 that talks about technology and its application in everyday life. Now herein we are seeing a merger of these two topics, wherein we see that education system is being facilitated through technology, and hence this topic can be asked in both these two papers. Now in this article, the author has been raising various questions with respect to this educational technology. He has been raising questions such as, do people really know? Do people really know what their children should be studying at the young age? And is the computer science education really appropriate for such young children? Here we need to understand that in this day and age, digital technology is everywhere, including in the education sector. Hence, it is very difficult to ignore technology that is entering each and every domain. At max, we should try to reap the benefits that this technology offers. Now, especially with respect to education, technology is important for it facilitates what is known as collaborative education. Now, technology provides online platform that acts as an effective stage for peer studies and for students and teachers to come together to study and discuss on issue of relevance. Further, it promotes remote learning in rural areas and hilly areas where the last mile connectivity is really low, and it helps provide high quality education and material to such far-fetched areas. Next important factor is the use of technology to educate disabled students. Now, disability is a great barrier for education. Presently, 45% of the disabled in India are illiterate, vis-a-vis 26% of the general population that is illiterate. Hence, disability in itself increases the chances of illiteracy. Hence, digital education can help bridge this gap, wherein the disabled students now can study at their own place and at their own pace. Next importance of technology in education is that it reduces the storage effort. Since education and books are online, no hard copy material or heavy bags are to be carried by the students, which is a great concern in the recent years. Next important factor is that access to international education and international material. This shall help promote interdisciplinary education among students of all classes, which shall help enhance the overall learning ability and capability of the students. Further, it is suggested that the technology in education shall promote anytime learning. Now, since the education is happening online, the students do not have to stick to a time frame. They can study at time of their liking and place of their liking. Now, the last importance of technology in education is faster updation. Now, as we see, the NCERTs are still not getting updated, and it is the recent new education policy that is finally thinking of upgrading the NCERTs. Now, this shall not happen when technology is used in education. Now, the data on the internet updates at a faster pace than the textbook do, and hence it provides updated information to the students and thus promotes effective learning. Now, recognizing these benefits, Government of India has been undertaking various technology aided education programs. For example, PME Vidya, that is a program to promote multimodal access to digital education online. Now, this has been facilitated through Diksha and Swayam Prabha TV channels. Further, Government of India has launched a tool known as Saransh that aims to provide a self-review and analysis for the CBSE affiliated schools. It enables students to analyze their performance and for teachers and students and parents to keep a close look at their performance levels. Next important effort is made through the Operation Digital program that aims to make the classroom smarts from class 9 to class 12. And lastly, through the New Education Policy 2020, the government has tried to create a National Education Technology Forum that shall further promote education through technology. Thus, clearly, Government of India has been taking various measures to promote technology-aided education in India. Now, moving on to the next article.
This next article appears on page number 6. Moment of reckoning. Reckoning, in other words, means the avenging or punishing of past mistakes or misdeeds. So the Congress has set the ball rolling for organizational elections in a period of great uncertainty in the party. The Central Election Authority of the party hopes to have a session of the All India Congress Committee by February 2021 that will elect Congress Working Committee and possibly a new president. And so, this particular event has brought the issue of inner party democracy into the limelight again. Now, for true democracy to take roots in the society, it is very, very important that parties within themselves follow the norms of democracy itself. For example, most advanced democracies in the world choose their candidates for important positions based on the elections conducted within the party. And the best example of that would be the elections for primaries for presidential elections. First, you become the candidate of your own party by winning over the members of your party, and then you become eligible to contest the elections. And so that is a demonstration of inner party democracy. But what you see in India is that most political parties are headed by hereditary political leaders. The tickets are given by the wishes of the top brasses of the party, and the power is held by a single person for a very, very long time, for 20, 25, even 30, 40 years. And so that shows the dismal state of inner party democracy in India. Now, this topic is extremely important from the perspective of GS2, polity and governance. So, as political parties are most crucial actors of Indian democracy, their democratic functioning becomes interlinked to the health and vibrancy of our own democracy. The lack of democratic functioning of the parties is mainly manifested in two fundamental aspects. First, the procedure for determining the leadership and composition of the parties are not completely open and inclusive. Of course, this adversely impacts the constitutional right of all citizens to equal political opportunity to participate in policies and contest elections. And the second, the centralized mode of functioning of political parties and the stringent anti-defection law of 1985, which was of course later on amended. So let us now discuss the first. In most of the major political parties, the election to organizational posts at various levels are fraught with challenges. And it has been observed that the leadership is mostly decided by a very small number of party functionaries who hold sway over party administration. Even when elections take place in which members of the national, organizational or decision-making body of the party participate, the predetermined choice of the party elite is merely supported by the other members. Most of the times, the election to leadership positions are uncontested and unanimously decided. There is no opposition most of the times. In many instances, the ceremonial rubber stamp organizational elections are also held after a long intervals, and that too with serious irregularities. Now, this obviously adversely impacts the constitutional right as we have discussed. Then the next set of challenge to inner party democracy comes from a stringent anti-defection law. Now we know that anti-defection law of 1985 requires the party legislators to act according to the party whip, which is decided by the dictates of high command or highest authority in the party. Now we know that this act was brought in place in order to defer Ayaram Gayaram or unabashed horse trading of lawmakers for breaking and making governments frequently. But what the act has done is that it has damaged the very cause of inner party democracy. We know that in anti-defection law, the legislation requires the elected representatives to strictly follow the party whip. Failure to do so results in disqualification of their membership. Therefore, the discretional autonomy of the legislature becomes hostage to the whims of the party leadership. And hence, the MPs and MLAs elected by the people are no more accountable and answerable to people, but rather to their own party leaderships. Because this act compels them to adhere to the directives of their party high command and therefore leads to increasing hold of the top leadership of the party on its members, because of which inner party democracy is stalled. So in this regard, there are few recommendations from important committees and reports. First and foremost, Dinesh Goswami Committee, Tarkunde Committee and Indrajit Gupta Committee have strongly argued for more transparent working of political parties in the country. In 1999, Law Commission report strongly recommended the introduction of a regulatory framework for governing the internal structure and inner party democracy of the political parties. Even a draft Political Parties Registration and Regulation of Affairs Act 2011 was submitted to Union Law Ministry, but it was not tabled. Now you should know that there are no explicit provisions in the Constitution that lays down guidelines for regulating the conduct of political parties in India. Only Section 29A of the Representation of the People Act mandates the registration of political parties. And the Election Commission of India is not equipped to regulate the functioning of the political parties. And so that is from where the need for a new law or even the amendment of the Representation of the People Act comes into play. So as a way forward, you can suggest that there is a need to amend the Representation of the People Act to include the mandatory provisions of inner party democracy, conduct of regular, free and fair elections. Let's now move on to the next news.
Now this particular article appears on page number 14 and is titled as Government Allots Rupees 2000 crores for the infrastructure funding. This article basically highlights that the Union Cabinet has recently given an approval for the equity infusion of almost up to rupees 6,000 crores into the National Investment and Infrastructure Fund's debt platform. Now this equity infusion by the Government of India is said to give a boost to the national infrastructure pipeline that seeks to invest almost up to rupees 102 lakh crore over the next 5 years. Now the article that we are going to discuss here shall be important both from the perspective of prelims as well as mains. In mains, it shall be part of GS paper 3 under the subsection Indian economy, specifically important from the topic of the investment models. Further, as you can see in previous year prelims, that is prelims 2017, we had a direct question related to the National Investment and Infrastructure Fund. Hence, as part of this video analysis, we'll first understand as to what exactly is the Sovereign Wealth Fund. Then we'll understand the concept of the National Investment and Infrastructure Fund. And then we'll understand the overall significance of this equity infusion by the Government of India into NIIF's debt platform. So firstly, coming to the concept of the Sovereign Wealth Fund. See, some of the countries across the world are basically export-oriented countries. Since they focus on boosting their exports, some of these countries have built up huge amount of forex reserves. Now, in order to optimally utilize their forex reserves and make huge amount of profits, what these countries have typically done is, these countries have diverted or used certain percentage of their forex reserves to create a separate dedicated fund which is referred to as the Sovereign Wealth Fund. Now the money which is lying under this Sovereign Wealth Fund is then used to invest in the global financial market as well as various real estate projects. Now for example, the money may be invested in the global stock market such as the New York Stock Exchange, the London Stock Exchange, Tokyo Stock Exchange in various shares, bonds, debentures in order to make huge profits. They can also make an investment in the various real estate projects and infrastructure projects in the other countries. So what they are basically doing is they have created a separate dedicated fund in order to make optimum returns or profits from their forex reserves. Take for instance China. China, as you all must be aware, it is basically a global manufacturing hub and it is an export-oriented country. Hence, in order to optimally utilize its forex reserves, China has set up a separate sovereign wealth fund referred to as the Chinese Investment Corporation. The money from this particular fund is in turn invested in the global market as well as various infrastructure projects across the world. So with respect to sovereign wealth fund, please make a note of three important aspects. First is it is 100% owned by the government. Secondly, it is mainly funded through the forex reserves. And thirdly, the sovereign wealth fund normally makes an investment in the global markets in the other countries. Now take for instance Norway. Presently Norway is operating the world's largest sovereign wealth fund known as the Government Pension Fund Global. This has a total corpus of almost around $1 trillion. Now coming to the National Investment and Infrastructure Fund. Now this particular fund was set up by the government in the year 2015. This is referred to as the quasi-sovereign wealth fund. This is so because if you look at the sovereign wealth fund set up by the other countries, these sovereign wealth funds are 100% owned by their own governments. Whereas in case of India, the National Investment and Infrastructure Fund has a government ownership of only around 49%, whereas the remaining 51% ownership is from the domestic investors and the foreign investors. So some of the domestic investors in the NIIF include investors such as HDFC Bank, the Axis Bank, ICICI Bank and so on. Similarly, even the foreign investors including the sovereign wealth funds of other countries can also make an investment in the NIIF. For example, the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority became the first institutional investor to make an investment in the NIIF in the year 2017. So please do make a note that unlike the sovereign wealth fund of other countries which is 100% owned by their own governments, in case of India, the NIIF has a government's ownership of only 49%. That is why the NIIF is referred to as the quasi-sovereign wealth fund. So what is the role of this NIIF? Basically, NIIF provides both equity as well as debt support to various infrastructure financing companies. Now these infrastructure financing companies could either be the public sector companies or the private sector companies. Take for instance the Indian Railway Finance Corporation, the National Housing Bank, the Power Finance Corporation. Now each of these entities basically provide financing in various fields. For example, IRFC provides financing for the railway projects. The National Housing Bank provides financing for the housing projects. PFC, that is Power Finance Corporation, provides financing for the power projects. So the NIIF can either provide the equity support or the debt support to each of these public sector entities. It can also provide equity and the debt support even to the private sector entities. Now let's say there is a particular NBFC that is providing various financing options to the companies who are involved in construction of say highway projects. So NIIF can provide for both equity support as well as a debt support to such NBFCs. Now the National Investment and Infrastructure Fund has set up a platform referred to as the debt platform. Now in this particular platform, the NIIF has already made an investment of almost around 2000 crores. Now the government or the Union Cabinet has decided that it will infuse almost up to 6000 crores into this particular debt platform which has been set up by the NIIF. So going forward, this particular debt platform set up by the NIIF would then issue bonds in the market. Now whatever money is raised to the issuance of bonds will be in turn used to provide the equity and debt support to various infrastructure financing companies. So the idea here is if the government has infused 6000 crores into the debt platform and if the debt platform is issuing bonds, automatically it will inspire greater confidence among the investors in buying these bonds, since the debt platform as such to a certain extent is owned by the government of India. So what is the significance of this particular government move? First and foremost, as you must be aware, the Indian economy is reeling under the recession. So the higher amount of investment in the infrastructure creation would not only lead to increase in the investment expenditure, but it will also lead to increase in the consumption expenditure, and thus it will facilitate economic revival through greater investment in the infrastructure creation. Secondly, presently the bond market in case of India is not so well developed, wherein the corporate debt to GDP ratio is hardly around 17%. This is considered to be much lower as compared to the other countries. So going forward, the debt platform set up by the NIIF would be issuing the bonds. So it is expected that it will help us deepen the corporate bond market in India. Thirdly, by providing financial support for the creation of infrastructure, the NIIF would be able to reduce the financial pressure on the government of India. Thirdly, whatever money is to be raised, all that money will be raised within India in terms of rupees. Hence, this will help us reduce the foreign currency exposure of the Indian companies. And lastly, see, the banks in case of India normally rely on the short-term deposits. These short-term deposits are in turn used by the banks in order to give long-term loans for various infrastructure projects. So this in turn leads to the asset liability mismatch. So in this particular case, we are basically relying on the issuance of bonds in order to raise money for the creation of infrastructure projects. Hence, we would be able to reduce the pressure on the banks.
Now beginning with the prelim summary. Now this article, that is the Jallikattu is the India's entry for Oscars, is presented in today's newspaper. Now this article talks about a Malayalam movie called Jallikattu that has caused India's entry into the Oscars. Now clearly this is not important from the point of view of UPSC, but it is very important to know what is Jallikattu from the point of view of the prelims. Now Jallikattu is a traditional bull taming sports that is organized every year in Tamil Nadu during the harvest festival of Pongal. Now this sport requires the fighters to pounce over a running bull and try to hold on to its hump and move along without falling from the animal. Now Jallikattu is a very old traditional sport that has been found even in the seals of Mohenjo-daro. Further, it is also found reference in the Silpadikaram text of the South. However, in 2014, the Supreme Court had banned this event after a plea by PETA, that is People for Ethical Treatment of Animals. However, recently the state government, after its insisting that Jallikattu is a crucial part of Tamil culture and heritage, the ban was lifted, and now this is again being practiced in Tamil Nadu. Further, this must not be confused with Kambala, which is another traditional bull-buffalo race that takes place in coastal Karnataka. Now, next important article from the point of view of prelims is the more trilateral naval exercises are on the cards. Now, this article talks about the increasing bilateral, trilateral and multilateral exercises that India has been conducting with its allies. Now, this article talks about Aussie Index, which is an exercise between India and Australia. Now, similarly, there is a list of exercises that are important and must be known from the point of view of prelims examination. Please go through this list and try to memorize these exercises from the point of view of the prelims examination.